Today we're here in the DeFuniak Springs Library with the Library Director and Manager, Dan Owens. Dan has been here for a long time with the county. He knows pretty much everything having to do with the DeFuniak Springs Library and its history. So we want to go through that today and kind of give the public and everybody an introduction and some good information on this library. But first I want Dan to introduce himself. So Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of where you started, maybe some of your background, how you got to Walton County.
Well, I started out as undergraduate degree in library science, and I went into the military, spent 22 years in the Air Force, and when I retired I went to work at a library in Bellevue, Nebraska. I was there about 10 years and then I moved here in 1999, March of 1999, and I've been the director since May of 1999. And I've learned a lot about the history of the library and DeFuniak Springs and Walton County in those 20 years.
Where'd you grow up, Dan? Did you grow up in the Midwest? Is that kind of why you went back there?
Well, I am a wandering Texan. Both my parents were born in Texas, and my father was in the military, so by the time I was 16 years old, I'd lived in 16 different places. And, but we always went back to Texas to stay with my grandparents as we transitioned from one home to another.
Well, I would imagine, you know, with all the different kind of stuff you have in libraries, for information-wise, wandering's good because that's what you do in libraries. You can go anywhere and get different topics. There's a lot of history, like you said, in this library. We're going to go look at some of that history, talk about the old part of the library, some of the decorative, and there's some arms and weaponry in here that has some historic value. So this will be your kind of last hurrah. You're going to be leaving us after 20 years?
Yes, this is today, November 22nd, is my last day to work in the library.
We're going to miss him. He's going to be hard shoes to fill as far as how our programs work here in Walton County. But that being said, thank you so much for your 20 years that you gave this county. And for some reason, I feel if we have to call on you, you'll still be able to call and answer some questions for us.
Yes.
All right, thanks. I appreciate it, Dan. We'll go check out the front and some of the history.
Thank you.
Dan, one of the first things we notice when you pull up here to the library off the Circle Drive here around Lake DeFuniak is the historical marker that's been placed. My understanding is, looking at the sign, this is as old as me. It's been here since 1976, but this library certainly goes way before that. Tell us a little bit about the marker and the history itself, the kind of beginnings of what made this library.
Well, the Ladies Library Association started in 1886 because they felt like they needed a library. And this marker points out this building was constructed in 1887 and has been serving as a library continuously since 1887. And it was built purposely to serve as a library, and that is the distinction. We're not the oldest library in the state, but we are the oldest library that was built to serve as a library and has done so continuously since its inception in 1886.
All right, Dan, behind us is the actual library that sits here on Circle Drive. There was three pieces to this, or three parts of the building, if I understand correctly. There was the original part that was put up in 1886, 87.
1887.
Okay, and then there's been two additions since then. Talk a little bit about the building itself, the history of the building, and kind of when those renovations were done to expand it.
The first structure had the two windows on the side. It was constructed in 1887. Then 1894, you can see where it juts out, the windows there. That was added on because it had so many books and so little room. And approximately 1984, you can see the last over there where there are not any windows. That was added in 1984, and that was 2 levels, and that's been the last addition to the library.
Right, and I can tell you, it's amazing how close they got it on the outside. I think you can tell from the backside, looking from the lake a little bit, but looking from the front, I mean, when they did these renovations and added these sections, it's hard to tell what was the original building and what's the back building. As we go in, we're going to see some differences inside, though. Is that correct?
Yes. And one thing that a lot of people comment when they get inside, it's bigger than they expected. Because when you come down Live Oak, you see the little library. And it's often referred to as the little library on the circle. But when you get inside, it opens up and it's bigger than you you would expect it to be.
All right, great, fantastic. Let's go in and look at some of the inside, especially the original building. And I know there's some really neat things in there that you can show us and show the viewers.
Okay. Now we're in the library, and there's some features of the library that are important historically. One of the things are the floors. These floors are the original floors from the building when it was constructed in 1887. They're the heart pine, longleaf pine, the wood that once it's cured, it is like iron. I've tried to drive a nail through it, and it does not work. You have to drill a hole before you can drive a nail through them. And these boards have nails that were wrought, hand wrought. They're not the round nails, they're the square cut nails, and so that and they're tongue and groove, and they're very durable. As you can imagine, they've been here since 1887. In 1894, the library had so many books and so little room, according to the minutes of the Ladies Library Association, that they added the next room. And where the floors transition, that was the 1894 edition. And both editions had porches that went around. And the 1894 edition had a porch that was on the back of that. In the 40s, the back porch was enclosed. And then in the 50s, the lower part was enclosed. And in 1984, the last addition to the library was added on, and they tore off the back porch, and here where the carpet starts is the 1984 edition. Now, one of the things we like to point out is that the library, with its porches and different things, the little oak tree that's shown in this photograph is the large oak tree out front. And there, you can see the porches that went around the library. And it was a very open air type thing with these tall windows. They would adjust the windows to let air circulate. And they did not have air conditioning. The transom over the front door still is functional, but it's been closed off for modern purposes for heating now that we have central air and heating in the library. The Ladies Library Association was started to support the Chautauqua movement, and they decided they needed a library, so they started collecting books and monies to support the library. Now, one of the things that we like to show off is one of our oldest books in the library. The library started with donations of books and some funds. Now, Wallace Bruce was a noted poet in his time, and he became a member of the Florida Chautauqua. And this particular book says, "To the DeFuniak Library with the compliments of Wallace Bruce, April 22nd, 1887. And what's distinctive about the book, it's the DeFuniak Library number 17. So this was the 17th book in the library's collection. And so this is one of his books. And at one point they put in the rules of the library. And some of the rules were that any person over the age of 12 years of age may secure a library ticket good for 1 year by the payment of $1. Originally, the Ladies Library Association charged 10 cents to be a member. This was not a free library, it was a subscription library, meaning that you had to pay to be a member. And that's the way Benjamin Franklin set up his library initially. It was a subscription library to help support and pay for the library. And so Wallace Bruce donated several of his books, and we have them in our collection still. They're no longer in circulation, but we do have them in our collection. This is a collection of our historical novels and books and donations to the library. And over on the end are the Pansy novels. Isabella Alden was a very famous author. She wrote over 300 books for young women, and she used a pen name Pansy. And a lot of the books that she wrote are associated with the Florida Chautauqua. She actually has a cottage here in DeFuniak Springs on Lake DeFuniak that was right beside Wallace Bruce's home. And we have some of these books were in the library's collection, others were just donations. This particular book I like to point out, I ask people if they are bookworms. And if you look right here, you'll see a little hole in the book, and it goes all the way through the book, and it's actually beetles that are found in the wild that put their larvae, and you open up the book and you find a worm that's eating through the book because the book had paper had such a high wood fiber content that these beetles would bore through the books. And if you left the book on the shelf very long, it might have what they call wormholes. There would be a whole bunch of holes throughout the book. Fortunately, this book had its beetle and its worm in it before it's brought to the library. For many years, we did not have a museum in Walton County, so people would bring things to the library. These shells, different shells. Here's a shell collection that was donated, and this music box. This is a Regina music box. It was donated to the library by Mr. Schiffer in memory of his wife. And according to the nephew, Mr. and Ms. Schiffer were older when they had gotten married, and when Mr. Schiffer, or Mrs. Schiffer passed away, and Mr. Schiffer just wanted to give this to the Bob Sykes Museum, and someone said, why don't you see if the library will take it? So fortunately, in 1985, he donated it to the library in memory of his wife. Now, it is a Regina music box. They quit making them in the 1930s and 20s because the gramophone and the Victrola put this company out of business for music boxes. This particular model was the top of the line. It cost as much as a piano, and it was considered a fine musical instrument. Pastoral scene of watercolor. Because of the fact that Mr. and Ms. Schiffer lived in Freeport, down near the bay, the humidity has taken its toll on the music box. We have swords and weapons from all over the world. In this corner, most of these are from the Near East, from the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. We have swords over the door that are typical of the Spanish era. And in this corner, you have Japanese swords. In the next wall, you have Civil War era weapons. We have shields like from Persia. And moving on along, we have weapons from the Southeast Asia. And we have some war hammers and some war shields. There's such a variety. There's battle axes, sabers, cutlasses, and a lot of European and Asian types weapons in this room. Now the chainmail is an interesting piece of weaponry, or defensive. I've had people tell me that an expert could tell me when and where that piece of chainmail was made by the way the links are formed and the style of the links and the way that they're linked together. We've not had an expert come in yet. Now the helmet above it, someone had pointed out to me that the Europeans' heads are oval in profile and Asian heads are more of a round profile. And so I think that helmet was from Asia. And right above it is a Japanese handgun. Now, it may seem strange that that long weapon is a handgun, but a man told me that the way that it was used was it would be held as in two hands and they would extend it out, and a second person would rest the barrel on their shoulder. And I thought that would be rather precarious to be the one that would be shouldering it. And it is a matchlock, and meaning that there was a fuse that would be ignited and it would come down and touch off the powder. And in this corner, you can see the battle axes, and there was a young man from Lincoln, Nebraska that was up at Fort Rucker doing some training, heard about our weapons, came down and said, please let me examine them and take photos. I did. He went back to Lincoln and sent me an email, said that he had contacted the British Museum and the battle axe was from the 12th century. Well, he didn't tell me which battle axe. Well, since then I found in books that both of these battle axes, the style of these two battle axes, were typical of the 12th century. So one or both of those battle axes could be from the 12th century. Now the halberd right in between them is cut off. And it makes me think that this collection had been part of an estate in Scotland, because Wallace Bruce and his son Kenneth Bruce were in Scotland, and I believe this is where Kenneth Bruce's interest in collecting weapons started. So I'm speculating that that had been cut down to be on display over a door or a mantle or something with another set of weapons. Now the helmet that's right below the Qatar, most of us associate that with the Spanish conquistadors. Well, I found by chance, a little bit of research, that that helmet was used by the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Italians, the French, the Germans, and the British. Apparently, all of Western Europe in the 1400s used that style of helmet. So, the other thing, none of the weapons came out of the lake. That helmet was not left here by Ponce de Leon when he came through. All these weapons were brought here by Wallace Bruce and his son Kenneth Bruce. So they are not local artifacts. Now in this corner we have examples of halberds. We have some spears, a sword from Southeast Asia, a war hammer, a crossbow. And this particular crossbow, I found an example of a copy of an engraving of a hunting scene, and it had a crossbow identical to this one, and it said that it was designed to shoot round projectiles for hunting small game, which I thought was unusual because crossbows of this era normally shot bolts, which were very powerful weapons. And there are so many different swords and weapons here that, like I said, these are primarily European. Now here we have examples of what appear to be African spears. I think they were designed to be used with an atl or a throwing stick. And then over here we have the sword on the top is a boar sword with those little prongs on the side. If you're hunting a boar and you hit it with a normal spear, a sword, the boar were so vicious that they would just run up the blade through them and bite your arm. So those prongs would fend off the wild boars to keep them from getting to you. Then in the corners we have what appear to be African spears. Again, since we did not have any documentation that originated with the weapons because they were involved in the fire, we have to speculate. And then the sword is a Landsknecht, or it's a parade sword. It is a ceremonial sword that, rather than this particular one, it was modeled after an actual weapon, but this particular one was just for ceremonial purposes. And above the windows, we have several battle axes. The one on the right is an African battle axe. The little sword that's in the middle is a Qatar from Southeast Asia. It would be strapped to your wrist with the blades sticking out. And then right below it, that vicious-looking object is actually a device to use to pull the string back on a crossbow. It's not used to impale people. And in this corner we have representations of Civil War era weapons. The top one is a cap and ball. The second one is a flintlock, and it is a breech loading flintlock. Below it we have another example of a crossbow, and then up in this corner is a an interesting weapon from the Civil War era. Had a young man come in and say that he had a copy of one, and it was just like the one he had. I got that one down for him, and the first thing he did was, he said was it's lighter than his. And then he stuck his finger in the bore, and he was trying to check for the rifling, and there was no rifling. And my guess is that that came back from the Civil War. They didn't want it to shoot 45 caliber or 44 caliber musket balls, so they bored it out so it'd be a shotgun, and that's why it weighs less than the original. We have some weapons from what I presume is North Africa, or Saudi Arabia Peninsula, and another crossbow. Now, these two crossbows in this corner, I believe, were also designed to shoot round projectiles. If you look at this pouch on this crossbow, and then over on this crossbow on the other side, they were designed for shooting or holding a object that appeared to be a round projectile rather than a bolt or an arrow. So I think it's very unusual that the three crossbows in this collection were designed to shoot round projectiles rather than the bolt. The little story about the mace that's right here is that it was lying on top of the bookcase in the other room, and I did not know that it was there. And the staff came in and said, "Can you do something about that weapon that the boys are playing with, the teenage boys?" Well, they were tall enough that they could see it and reach up, and they were grabbing it and swinging it around. So I had to put it up over here, and I used a fishing line to tie it down. Is a bill, the first weapon here, and along the edge of this weapon right here, it has some engraving or some etching, and I never noticed it until a man that was from out of the state, he came to visit, and he was looking at that with binoculars and trying to decipher that. This is a lance neck. It is a parade sword. It is a ceremonial sword. Now, if you've got a good grip on it, you can see that it wobbles. And so it's not designed for combat. This particular style is called a flambeur, meaning a flame that flickers, like on a candle. And it had, apparently at one time, a cloth covering over the handle. And so it was a ceremonial sword. Now, people ask me more about it, unfortunately, because the weapons were involved in the fire. When it got to the library, we don't have any documentation on it.
Dan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time today to show us around the library, to give us a history of this building, of the contents of this building. This is something everybody needs to come see. If you haven't been down here, whether it's to read or do some research or look at some weapons, there's a lot to do. Come on down to DeFuniak Springs. Dan, it has been a pleasure having you here, having you part of Walton County for over 20 years. And we certainly hope you enjoy your retirement, and hope to see you back in the library, you know, as a patron as opposed to a director.
Yes, and I've enjoyed working in the library and serving the community, and I've learned a lot about the history of the weapons and Walton County and DeFuniak Springs.